Hi guys, I'm going to be going over some of the material from this evolution exam review. So the first question says, lions have sharp claws and teeth to allow them to catch their prey. Explain how lions develop this trait using all steps of natural selection. So generally, for any natural selection question like this, you want to be specific and say, first of all, some lions are born with sharper claws or teeth than other lions. There's differences among them, variation in the population. And then not all of the lions are going to survive to adulthood to reproduce. Some of them are going to die. And the lions with better claws and teeth are more likely to survive and to be able to reproduce. And then the last step, the key part, I'll even write it. The lions with the sharp claws and teeth will pass that trait on to their offspring, thereby it becomes more common in the population. So again, it's about who lives, who dies. The lions that have the less beneficial traits are more likely to die. The lions with the more beneficial traits are more likely to live, and then they will pass on those traits to their offspring. Artificial selection, that's when humans are breeding for specific traits. So for like the example with the pigs, always breeding the biggest pigs together and not breeding the smallest pigs. And eventually you get large pigs. And so for an organism that has been influenced, you could pick anything that humans farm or have as pets or livestock or use in any way, really. Sexual selection is like the peacock with the feathers. That's when traits that don't necessarily help an individual survive get passed on, but they get passed on because they help the individual to reproduce and they're able to mate successfully, and so those traits get passed down. Okay, so evolution, remember our definition of evolution is change in the gene pool, so at the genetic level, in a population, so a group of individuals over time. So from one generation to the next generation. All of those parts are important. So do individuals evolve? No, individuals do not evolve. An individual animal, like an animal, cannot evolve. A group of animals can, but an individual cannot change its genes and thereby evolve itself. That's not something that can happen. Right. Homologous structures, the example of that was like the arm or forelimb bones in various vertebrates. These are structures that are similar because some ancestor here developed that structure, and then the different species that came from them continued to have that structure. So again, like the arm bone layout, the one bone, one big bone, two smaller bones, bunch of little chunky bones, and then finger bones, that sort of pattern evolved in some ancestral animal that all of these other animals now have that pattern. Analogous structures are when individuals have similar features, but it's not because they got it from a common ancestor. It's more like it evolved here, and then they both got it. So it evolved multiple times because it was a useful feature, but it's not a homologous structure because it evolved multiple times and not just once and then they both got it. So the example for that was like insect wings and bird wings. They both have wings, but it's not that some ancestor evolved wings and then it led to both insects and birds. Insect wings and bird wings evolved separately. And then vestigial structures are those structures that were useful to an ancestor but are no longer used in the current organism. And the example for that was the hip bones in the whales. So whales have hip bones even though they don't have legs because they evolved from something that did have legs. And so those bones are completely useless to them right now, but they still have them because they evolved from something that did need them. True or false, scientists believe all organisms are related. That is true. We believe that if you were to trace the phylogenetic trees down far enough, eventually you would get to kind of the first life that all organisms, if you go back far enough, came from. Molecular evidence for evolution. So big thing you're looking at there is DNA. So comparing DNA from different species and seeing places where the DNA is very similar in different species and in a lot of species. So like how our DNA is very, very similar to chimpanzees' DNA and gorillas' DNA. It shows us that we are closely related to chimpanzees and gorillas because we have all of that in common. You can also look at the structure of proteins and see how similar those are. That's another molecular evidence piece. Right, the different types of selection. We'll do the three. So disruptive selection, we'll all start with sort of a bell curve. So in disruptive selection, that's when the two sort of extreme traits are favored, and the individuals that are sort of more average are less likely to survive. Directional selection is when the organisms are kind of shifting in one direction to become, darker or faster or bigger or smaller or whatever it is. They're kind of all evolving one way. And then stabilizing selection is when the sort of average middle ones are surviving the best, and so therefore the more extremes are being selected against. Okay, to develop a new species, there has to be a loss of gene flow, meaning if you have a group and it gets divided, and then the ones on this side and the ones on this side are no longer able to breed with each other, we would say that is a lack of gene flow. And we would expect the individuals on this side and the individuals on this side, over time, eventually, since they're not breeding with each other anymore and there is no gene flow, we would expect those to evolve into two different species. So some example scenarios might be, say, the Grand Canyon splitting up that population of squirrels, or it might be a new river coming through and splitting up a population, or maybe certain individuals from a population, like a group of birds gets blown out to sea by a storm and they land on an island, and now they're by themselves out here and they're only breeding with each other on this island. They might, over time, they'll evolve into a different species than the birds that are back over on the mainland. You can see I'm very good at drawing birds just using my finger here. So organisms are considered the same species if they can breed and produce offspring that is viable, meaning healthy, and fertile, meaning that those offspring can then produce their own offspring. So we had the example of the horse and the donkey being similar, but they're not the same species because their offspring, the mule, is not fertile. The mules cannot have babies of their own. Therefore, we do not consider horses and donkeys to be the same species. And then here's a phylogenetic tree, so you will need to be able to read and sort of interpret these phylogenetic trees. So which species is most closely related to the alligator? The species that are the most closely related are the species that have the most recent common ancestor. So in this example, here's the alligator. The species it shares the most recent common ancestor with, which is here at F, is the robin. So the robin is the species most closely related to the alligator. It is not the lizard because the most recent common ancestor of the alligator and the lizard is here. It's further down on the tree, it's further back, it's less recent. So the lizard is not the most closely related to the alligator. Draw a square around the most recent common ancestor of the rat and the frog. Okay, here's the rat, here's the frog. So if we kind of trace their lines back, we find the most recent common ancestor that they both share is right there at C. And what is one species you would expect to have claws or nails? So here's claws and nails. So I would expect everything right here, the lizard, the alligator, the robin, the rat, and the gorilla, to have claws and nails, because that trait developed here, and that would be a homologous structure that all of those share. I would not expect these, the hagfish, the salmon, or the frog, to have claws and nails, because claws and nails developed here, and so these were kind of before that, they're back here, and so they would not have claws or nails. And the last question is about how fossils can provide evidence for evolution. A big thing with fossils is that they allow us to see what species that no longer exist look like, species that are currently extinct, and it allows us to watch sort of a progression over very, very long periods of time. So, human lives and the existence of humans hasn't really been that long, and it's hard for us to observe this large scale evolution that takes a very long time. But by looking at fossils, we can see the progress of species over thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and how they've changed over time. All right, that's going to be it for this review. Please ask if you have any questions, and I'll see you for your exam.